Thank you, MND, for the lovely introductions, and thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today during this panel discussion on revolutionizing disease treatment from discovery to delivery, where our esteemed panelists will share their unique expertise on the topic. Jumping right in with Jared. Drug discovery is an arduous journey, to say the least. Jared, can you please share with us some of the challenges that Halia has faced in the past, especially in translating early-stage research into real-world treatments, and how you navigate them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much. You know, at Halia, we've always tried to look at things a little bit different. So we really integrate our clinical team quite early in the drug discovery process, and we've also used AI, as everyone's talked about. We've been developing our own machine learning and AI for many, many years and have an internal library that we screen. And so we take a different approach to take our AI and really drive our decision making with both our failures and our successes within the lab, which really helps us accelerate our timeline. And then with our clinical team, really looking at biomarkers early on to help us identify how we're going to show efficacy quickly. So we're not wasting a lot of time. Kind of like we just heard with that black box of, you know, walking away from a clinical trial and saying, well, in a year, maybe we'll know if our drug works. We get that rapid feedback. And so it's really helped us to translate things from the lab into the clinic quite rapidly, because we know that a lot of these models were in very novel places, and you know what works in a mouse rarely will work in a human as well. And so we've really got to think outside the box, and that's where AI and early clinical input has really helped us move drug discovery forward much more rapidly.
Following up on that, we tend sometimes to learn more from our failures than our successes. Thank you, Jared. That ties in nicely with my next question to Islam. From a CRO standpoint, how is IROS helping to make clinical research more agile and regionally relevant, especially in emerging markets like the Middle East?
Thank you a lot, Mary. So we are targeting several approaches. One of them is that we're leveraging the technology and AI. So we are leveraging AI and real-world data in order to make sure of the data accuracy and the insights that we are giving to our collaborators, so to make sure that they are having the right data related to the country. But also we are looking at the regional relevance. So we are lucky to have programs here in the region like Emirati Genome Program and premarital screening. And those programs help us to identify the relevant therapies to the population here in the region. And this has helped us to design protocols that can be more relevant to the population around here. The third part is that we are working in a collaborative partnerships with all the ecosystem, starting from the regulators, the biopharma, the biotech, and also the hospitals that we have here. We are working with them as a partners, so in order to make sure that we are all helping the population and helping the patient to find more patients.
Thank you, Islam. A great advantage for IROS, as you mentioned, is that we have this unique ecosystem in which we exist. Healthcare, life sciences ecosystem that is M42, and that brings us to you, Paul. At the end of the day, everything that we do in healthcare space is geared towards improving patients' lives. How does M42's integrated ecosystem ensure that these innovations happening in research translate into better patient outcomes on the ground?
So if we look at the ecosystem, and I've only been an integral part of the ecosystem in the last year or so, and within a few weeks of being here, I tried to map it out just so that I could get some clarity on who the different players were and how they might link together. And so if I try and visualize, and maybe for the audience, kind of trying to paint the picture of what that looked like, if you think that we've got a very large genome program sponsored by the Department of Health, where M42 has been instrumental in generating the data around that, that's an incredibly powerful resource for all sorts of reasons. I'll come back to that in a second. We've got the potential to link that into the clinical record system. And there's another M42 company as part of the ecosystem, Malafi, that you're an integral part of, that is absolutely critical in terms of maybe unlocking the insight by linking clinical data back into the genomic data. So that platform, let's describe it as a platform, is a very powerful tool to facilitate the delivery of patient value, but can also unlock research value. And so engaging research in this endeavor can ultimately translate into clinical value, but there's a process that needs to be gone through. And traditionally, that process may take 20 years for research publications to be published, and to trickle down into something that ultimately may impact a patient at the patient's bedside. When you engage with the broader ecosystem, which I'll come on to in a second, I think there's the opportunity to compress that time cycle. So instead of that 20-year cycle, why can we not try and achieve the same goal of translating research insights into an impact at the patient bedside, maybe within a 2-year time frame? But that can only happen if you've got an ecosystem that can facilitate that. So what's beyond the core platform of omics linked to clinical data that might enable that accelerated translational effort? Well, if you look at just M42, we have wonderful provider hospital networks in the form of things like Cleveland Clinic, Imperial College London, Abu Dhabi. There are a whole number of what are called assets that are delivering patient value as part of that ecosystem. That is an incredibly powerful mechanism to engage with the patient, to understand how you might use the platform that captures the clinical data and uses genomic data to drive innovation into how that system operates. But at the level above that, you have the interface into, for example, the regulatory environment. That it's so important from a DOH perspective, particularly in Abu Dhabi, seen with huge support in terms of driving innovation around regulation, which is not an easy thing to do. And so having that context that these different aspects of the ecosystem operate in, with the goal of demonstrating value for the patients, connecting together is a really important aspect of this. But if you go even a level beyond that, beyond the DOH in Abu Dhabi, you have the equivalent in Dubai, you have national regulators that are responsible in the UAE. There is then an interface into the external world of, for example, the pharma world. The whole range of biotech companies, Halia is a great example, bigger pharmaceutical companies that are interested in accessing this ecosystem, may not realize it exists in the form that it does, that can facilitate this accelerated translation. If you go even a step further, there is the global potential for research engagement. And if you can make the platform available to unlock more insights that could ultimately be translated into value for patients within the UAE, then everyone wins. And so for me, the opportunity and the role that M42 plays is almost like a catalyst within the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is broader than M42, that ultimately enables patient value, is sponsored but with government-based initiatives, engages with the clinical community, delivers patient value, engages with research, and brings industry to that interface. And that is that wonderful interweaving of those different elements of the ecosystem that makes it such a powerful proposition in the UAE. And I think a game changer. I think there is an opportunity to be world leading in many other aspects beyond just the genomics piece, but into really understanding how we might best use that ecosystem.
Couldn't agree more. There's a very fine balance that needs to be struck between the need for innovation and the drive for it, and maintaining, the safety and the welfare and the trust of the public that we all work towards serving at the end of the day. Thank you for that, Paul. Jared, coming back to your experience as a biotech innovator, what role do regional partnerships like the ones that Halia has with IROS and the broader M42 play in accelerating clinical development and expanding access to novel therapies, like the one Halia recently announced for Alzheimer's disease, for example?
No, that's, when we started to look at where we're going to run our clinical trials. So we're originally out of Utah, and we have a really unique infrastructure and kind of a community in Utah where we've tied the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints genealogical records with the healthcare system as well. And so we're used to this ecosystem, and we saw it, and we tried to find where can we go outside of that to find a similar ecosystem. And we found it here with M42 and with IROS. And to have these regional partners are just invaluable to us, to be able to understand both culturally the environment that we're going to be working in, but to have IROS have such a great understanding of the DOH, the EDE, and to be able to navigate that with us, and not for fee for service, but really as a collaborator, and then to be working with Paul and his group and doing feasibility around our Alzheimer's trial that hopefully we'll be able to to move forward here in the near future, but and to really use the genomic and the proteomic data someday to identify those patient populations that will be most affected by the drugs that we're developing really is a huge win for all of us. And so when you sit and see three groups coming together like this, it creates something that just will not ever exist anywhere else in the world. And so the UAE has an amazing opportunity right now to leverage this kind of new entrance into this area and do something that's going to be very disruptive and very novel, that will be able to do proof of concept here, and like Paul said, then go and have a global reach very shortly after that. And so it really will create such a win-win type environment for both the UAE and for global patient populations.
I think the key word you struck on there is collaborator. We are partners with our clients, with our end users, and at the end of the day, I believe, Islam, that IROS is definitely making strides in that aspect. Can you tell us more, with the increasingly complex regulatory environment, high client expectations, how is IROS positioning itself as a preferred partner, collaborator for biopharma companies looking to enter or expand in the UAE?
So I will take from Jared, and from you, Mary. We are working as a collaborators. We don't work as like service or service for fees, like Jared mentioned. We mainly work in order to expand those. And I will consider ourselves lucky as IROS because we are part of a big group like M42, where we have access to a huge infrastructure from hospitals, diagnostic labs, state-of-art omics lab. All those give us like a one-stop shop. And also being part of a regulatory framework like the Abu Dhabi and the ecosystem of the DOH that can provide you with a fast-track approvals. I remember in certain study we can get approvals within 2 weeks, maximum by 30 days. And this is all of those aspects, having the right infrastructure from the hospital, the expertise from the doctors, the right collaborators from CRO or even from labs or even from others, and the regulatory framework that is clear. I believe this is encouraging biotechs and the pharma in order to come here and discuss and be part of I believe that what is going in here will be marvelous and will be like changing the game. And changing it, that the Middle East can be a hub and the UAE can be a hub for developing of new treatment, new therapies, that fulfilling our population and the patients here in this region. And this is, I want to stress on this point. The difference in genetic profile that we are seeing makes us like we need more treatment and therapies that is developed from this region. I believe Paul can elaborate more in this, but what we see from the genetic profiling and what we see from all those testing that's happened is making us day by day sure that we need to develop therapies that is fulfilling and having relevance to our genetic profiles in those regions.
That definitely brings up a very interesting point regarding representation, partnerships, multiple stakeholders. In your view, Paul, picking up from where Islam left off, what's the single most critical factor in ensuring that these delivery systems can keep pace in the speed of medical innovation within a local context and to bring value to the local context, especially in complex disease areas where the region tends to be underrepresented?
So I will answer your question, Marie. The one thing I just wanted to pick up on with Islam, and just I've heard it, Jared, from what you've said in the past, is when you have a large-scale genomic program like the one we have here, and you understand how to use genomic data and certain mutations that you may be looking for, there is an opportunity that's created on the back of that allows you to almost turn the traditional model of recruiting into trials on its head. You're not waiting for patients to turn up at the physician's office almost on a serendipitous basis, waiting for that to happen over time, to have the right profile of individual that can be recruited based on those characteristics into a trial or not. You have the opportunity to proactively reach out. In the case at the moment where we have 700,000 local Emiratis sequenced already in a population of 1 million locals, you have the opportunity to use that to proactively reach out to the type of people that you need to recruit into your trial, Jared. And it happens to be in Alzheimer's in this particular case, but it's the principle of knowing digitally first, how you might, with the right consent, be able to connect to those patients proactively and invite them in to engage in something that otherwise you would have waited a very long time for them to appear at the physician's door. That's a game changer.
Really
That's fundamentally different approach to how you might recruit to trials. It potentially brings the cost down of those trials. It certainly accelerates the speed to them, and it allows you to do things you couldn't do elsewhere in the world.
Never do anywhere else.
That's a game changer.
So true.
And so even that one simple point, enabling your business.
Yeah, this is like the most critical part that we have. If you don't have the right patient and find the right profile and do the right diagnosis, you might end up with a bad clinical trial. And I will take what David mentioned yesterday. There's no wrong drug. There's a wrong clinical trial. And starting from the wrong clinical trial is starting from the wrong diagnosis and wrong patient profile that you enroll in this clinical trial. This is one of the most critical challenge that we face, is the patient recruitment and the right patient recruitment.
So I will answer your question now. In terms of, if I can summarize the question again, just to make sure I've understood, you're asking for the most critical kind of enabler of this ecosystem in
Yes,
the
so
future.
many stakeholders, like the gentleman pointed out, are involved in this
Yes.
ecosystem. It's a living, breathing environment, and it needs someone to keep everybody on track.
Absolutely. So if I was to point to the one most important thing, we have deep pockets of expertise in so many areas across our ecosystem here. Each of the stakeholders that I flagged earlier are, and you want them to stay as deep experts focused on their agenda, if I can describe it that. Whether you're a government regulator, a researcher within the UAE or internationally, whether you've got a clinical perspective looking to deliver patient value, or you're an industry participant looking to develop precision medicines, we want you to stay focused on that agenda. But sometimes what happens is there isn't a coordinating function that brings all those different agendas together. And so for me, the most important thing, certainly that I would want our team to play a fundamental role here is in facilitating the connection between the pockets of expertise. And I will translate that, if I can, into a patient world too. Often in healthcare, you see pockets of expertise treating a patient, but not always do we see the patient journey being mapped. And I would just like to translate that into the world that we're now operating in, to say it's the equivalent of the patient journey that crosses the deep pockets of expertise, and how can we facilitate bringing together those different agendas so that the sum of the parts equals more than the individual. 1 + 1 = more than 2, effectively.
Thank you, gentlemen. This brings us to my final question, and it is directed at all three of you. Let's start with you, Jared. In your opinion, how do you see this ecosystem shifting in the next 5 years? If you can bring out your crystal ball for us.
No, I mean, we dream big at Halia. You know, we say the harder that we work, the luckier we get. You know, and we've got great opportunities here in the UAE because of this kind of family, this bringing together, you know, of that deep expertise. I really see the UAE opening up as a disruptor in the healthcare system, to really show how it can be done different, both from the regulatory DH government side, with the clinical trials, and being able to help with the genomics and identifying those patient populations, being able to recruit them so much faster. Like Paul said, that will bring costs down. Using AI systems to help innovate more rapidly, and get those feedbacks, those yes/no answers much more quickly. I think we can see, you know, in the very near future, you know, a drug discovery, a target being chosen for a disease population, and a drug going into the first patients within a year's time. I really see that as a real opportunity for us and for this group. We could make it happen. I really believe that could happen.
Same question to you, Paul.
So I think we're already seeing what's going to be different is we're going to have companies like Halia, like Juvenescence that we saw this morning, seeing the opportunity in this local environment, becoming part of that ecosystem, which I think is wonderful news. You're relocating your business, Jared, into being part of this local ecosystem, facilitating the acceleration of that and driving that at scale, having more partnerships, delivering more value. And I would argue putting the UAE on the global map as a place to drive innovative healthcare, the delivery of innovative medicines, new therapeutic modalities, test it, trial it, make it happen here first, and then look at how we might internationalize that and take it globally from here. I think this will become a new global hub for innovation around our sector.
Islam, closing with you. Do you agree with our
Yeah,
colleagues?
I agree totally with Jared and Paul. I believe the region here will be a disruptor, and we will be, you can see in the upcoming 5 years that therapies that is coming outside of this region, because you have all the capabilities and we have all the infrastructure that is needed to develop this. We started with the diagnostic part, we started with building programs, and now it is time to move into the discovery part.
Thank you. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for your kind attention, and I thank my esteemed guests for their participation today. And we open the floor for any questions that any of you might have. If you can please state your question and the panel member you'd like to answer.
Yeah, actually, it's for all three. Just to get your perspective on what are the biggest barriers at the moment for entry into this ecosystem. I mean, it sounds incredibly appealing from a global perspective or even locally. What have been the biggest barriers to entry?
I will say one thing, and I will leave it to them. I believe is taking the first step from the biopharma and the biotech. And we have examples of people that taking the first step. And I believe we can ask them after, in the next year, what was their experience here. But I believe the biggest barrier now is taking the step and coming to this region. This is from our point of view.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree. We've created multiple companies in the United States, and that's the traditional place, drug discovery lives and resides. And to see the vision of what is wanting to happen here and taking that first step to trust it and trust the system and to realize how much of the ecosystem is here that we can leverage already. It's been pretty painless to get here and to start working and to get the clinical trials up and running. Great depth of expertise here in the country. So
There are probably three quick points that I would call out, if I can.
Of course, Paul.
The first of them is that we're talking about weaving together a clinical system and a research system. They're discrete agendas that need to be, you manage the interface between the two. I would just underpin that with this idea of an economic development agenda, a robust business case that can support some of the ideas and the investments that are required to make this happen. We need that, need more robust business cases, and we need to justify it from an economic perspective. That is challenging, but it's possible, and we're starting to do that. The second key thing I would flag is the importance of skills and capabilities locally on the ground. We are at the beginning of a journey, and it's going to take a while to attract the quality companies, the quality academic researchers, to build the ecosystem. It's a long-term endeavor. We've got to start somewhere. Completely agree with your point that just take the first step, but that's also a challenge. Having enough skills at the table and encouraging people to come and locally be based as part of this ecosystem. I think the third dimension is we need more companies at larger scale engaging in this ecosystem. We're at the very beginning of that. We see the partnership with Juvenescence this morning. We're talking about partnership with Halia. We need more companies in the ecosystem to flourish, generate evidence that says this is possible. It's not just theoretical. We can demonstrate it with practical examples of what can happen.
Thank you for your question, and thank you all for joining us today. Again, I thank the esteemed panel. Stay tuned for more great things to come from M42's participation in Abu Dhabi Global Health Week 2025.